1930s. A silent queen ruined by gin. 1960s. An Oscar winner smashing glasses at parties. 2000s. A comedian admitting one sip pulled him back under.
And alcohol is especially dangerous for people like myself, alcoholics.
Different decades, same addiction. Hollywood's glass never stayed empty. Clara Kimball, Young's career ruin. By the mid-1910s, she was one of the highest-paid women in Hollywood. Her face sold tickets, her name filled marquees, and studios trusted her to carry entire productions. But by the 1930s, the woman once hailed as a trailblazer was struggling to stay upright. Alcohol was a constant shadow. Reports from the period describe Young arriving late to sets or not showing up at all. Crews recalled her slurred speech and uneven moods, signs that drinking had taken priority over her work. What had once been an unstoppable career was now slipping away in plain sight. Hollywood could be ruthless with its stars, especially women. Unlike male counterparts who sometimes got away with drinking sprees, Young faced little sympathy from studio bosses. Producers complained she was unreliable, and by the early sound era her contracts dried up. Offers that had once come weekly slowed to a trickle and eventually stopped. The gossip press took notice. Scandal sheets ran stories about her disappearing from parties or being carried out after drinking too much. It was a cruel reversal. Only a decade earlier, she had been considered a model of independence, even starting her own production company. But by the Depression years, she was being written about as a cautionary tale. Her decline wasn't hidden. Court documents from financial disputes revealed how unstable her life had become. With no steady income and mounting debts, her reputation as one of the first real movie queens was gone. Alcohol, combined with a shifting industry that had little patience for fading stars, left her sidelined. By the end of the 1930s, Clara Kimball Young's name barely appeared in trade publications. When it did, it was often in reference to her past success, not present work. She lived for decades after her prime, but her career never recovered. Once a symbol of Hollywood's golden promise, Young had become an example of how quickly the industry could turn on those who couldn't control their vices. John Gilbert's final collapse. The year was 1936, and Hollywood headlines carried shocking news. John Gilbert was dead at only 38. For fans, it seemed sudden, but insiders had seen the end coming for years. His heart had failed, but alcohol had helped push him there. Gilbert had once been the screen's great lover, the man who rivaled Valentino for passion and Garbo for chemistry. In the silent era, audiences adored him, but when sound came in, his career faltered. Studio bosses blamed his voice. Biographers later argued that his slurred delivery was often the result of heavy drinking, not just the microphones. Stories from MGM sets paint the same picture. Crews reported him stumbling through takes, lines blurred by late-night whiskey. Executives tried to control the damage, sending vocal coaches and companions to keep him in check. Nothing worked. Gilbert preferred the bottle over discipline, even when it was clear his career depended on sobriety. His relationship with Greta Garbo was also tangled in alcohol. Friends recalled Gilbert showing up drunk to her house, desperate for attention. He drank to soften rejection, drank when he wasn't working, and drank when he was. Hollywood had little patience for stars who couldn't hold it together, and soon the leading roles dried up. Doctors warned him that his body couldn't keep up. Years of hard living had taken a toll, but he ignored every order. By the mid-1930s, Gilbert was drinking around the clock. Friends later said he seemed older than men twice his age, his once famous looks drained by alcohol. When the heart attack struck in early 1936, Garbo attended the funeral, but the studios barely blinked. A man who had been a matinee idol in the 1920s was already yesterday's news. Obituaries hinted at his talent, but they also made note of the drinking that had driven him down. The tragedy of John Gilbert wasn't only his early death, it was how fast the industry let him slip. In less than a decade, he went from Hollywood royalty to a warning whispered in backlots. Alcohol had stolen his career, and finally, his life. Frances Farmer's public arrests. The beauty salon on Wilshire Boulevard wasn't ready for the scene that unfolded in 1942. Frances Farmer, already notorious in Hollywood, was hauled out by police after a drunken brawl. Witnesses told reporters she cursed at staff, threw a hairbrush, and refused to leave until officers forced her into a squad car. That arrest wasn't her first. Farmer had been picked up earlier for driving under the influence, and police records show a string of public intoxication charges in the early 1940s. Each time, newspapers jumped on the story. The contrast was irresistible. A glamorous starlet one day, a handcuffed defendant the next. In court, Farmer made the headlines bigger. At one hearing, she shouted at the judge, insisting she was being targeted. Another time, she had to be restrained when she lunged toward officers. Journalists described her as wild-eyed and defiant, with alcohol blamed for fueling the outbursts. Behind the scenes, studio executives tried damage control. Paramount had invested heavily in her, billing her as a rising star. But every new incident meant more column inches about her drinking and less about her acting. Producers grew hesitant to cast her. Insurance companies refused to back films if Farmer was attached, citing her record. Family and friends couldn't stop the spiral. Reports from hospital staff confirmed multiple attempts at treatment, but Farmer rarely stayed sober. She went from promising roles opposite A-list co-stars to empty days punctuated by arrests in courtrooms. Even her lawyer, trying to reduce her sentences, admitted publicly that alcohol was a major problem. The beauty salon incident, with its photographs of Farmer being dragged by police, marked a turning point. It wasn't just gossip anymore, but a career-ending scandal broadcast across the country. In the middle of World War II, when Hollywood promoted stability and patriotic glamour, Farmer's drunken meltdowns stood out as chaos. Commitments to psychiatric institutions followed, but by then her image was shattered. A decade that should have cemented her as a household name instead left her reduced to tabloid fodder. The record of her arrests and the spectacle of her drunken courtroom appearances defined her reputation more than any film role. Van Johnson's hidden struggles. The crash nearly killed him. In 1943, while driving in Los Angeles, Van Johnson collided head-on with another car. The accident left him with a fractured skull, metal plates in his head, and scars that makeup artists spent hours covering on set. Friends later said that the pain never left him, and that's when the drinking began to take hold. MGM quickly worked to protect his image. Johnson was one of their golden boys, the all-American face they sold to audiences during World War II. Publicists carefully staged photographs, promoted his wholesome charm, and buried rumors about his nights out. But insiders remembered the other side. Coworkers whispered about liquor bottles in his dressing room and nights when he stumbled through rehearsals. By the 1950s, the cracks were showing. Johnson was often spotted leaving Hollywood clubs unsteady, with gossip columnists taking note. The cheerful screen persona clashed with the man outside the studio gates. Tabloids hinted at drinking problems without saying it outright, careful not to anger MGM, but fans who saw him in person knew. Colleagues on set described long breaks when Johnson disappeared, returning with glassy eyes and slow delivery. In one stage production, a fellow actor recalled having to cover for him when he forgot lines after an afternoon of drinking. These incidents never reached the headlines, but they circulated in industry circles. Even close friends admitted later that Johnson was never far from alcohol. The car crash had left him reliant on painkillers at first, but the bottle took over. Unlike stars who flaunted their excess, Johnson tried to keep it hidden. His charm worked with reporters, and MGM's publicity machine fought to protect him, but the reality followed him for decades. When the studio system declined in the late 1950s, so did Johnson's control. Without MGM cleaning up after him, the stories became harder to contain. Club sightings grew more frequent, and his private struggles were harder to deny. Behind the polished image of the boy next door was an actor leaning on alcohol to manage the pain of a body never fully healed. Susan Hayward's violent binges. The party should have been routine. cocktails, small talk, and studio gossip. Instead, guests remembered Susan Hayward suddenly smashing a glass against a table and shouting at friends. Incidents like this became a pattern in the 1960s, as alcohol turned the Oscar-winning actress from fiery to explosive. Hayward had always carried a reputation for intensity. On-screen, she delivered powerhouse performances in films like I Want to Live. Off-screen, that intensity magnified after a few drinks. Friends described her mood shifting in minutes, from playful laughter to shouting matches. More than once, dinners ended with her storming out or sending drinks flying across the room. Hollywood insiders noticed. Co-stars talked about her disappearing during shooting breaks and returning with slurred speech. Directors whispered about long delays when Hayward's temper and drinking collided. A few even refused to work with her again, despite her box office appeal, because the unpredictability was too costly. Her marriages also bore the weight of alcohol. Accounts from friends and family described constant fights with her husbands, many fueled by binge drinking. Police were occasionally called when arguments escalated late at night. While these moments rarely made it into the press at the time, the stories circulated among those who knew her best. By the mid-1960s, Hayward's drinking was an open secret in the industry. Journalists covered her public scenes with restraint, but behind closed doors, studio executives worried. She was too valuable to fire, but her volatility risked productions. Insurance firms raised concerns, just as they had with Frances Farmer years earlier. Even at award shows, her behavior hinted at the problem. Colleagues recalled her staggering while accepting drinks at banquets or vanishing from the table for long stretches. Her image as a tough, no-nonsense woman became tied to the alcohol that fueled so many of her blow-ups. Lee Marvin's barroom infamy. The bartender had seen it before. Lee Marvin hunched over a glass of whiskey, laughing too loud, staying long after the crowd thinned. By the late 1960s, Marvin was a regular in Los Angeles bars, known as much for his drinking as for his hard-edged roles in films like The Dirty Dozen. Colleagues said the barroom stories weren't exaggerations. Marvin could drink for hours, then show up on set the next morning looking rough. On one production, he passed out mid-shoot, forcing delays and angering the crew. Directors tolerated it because audiences loved his tough guy persona, but privately, they admitted alcohol often dictated the schedule. Friends described marathon nights that ended in fistfights or blackouts. Marvin didn't hide it. He leaned into his reputation. In interviews, he joked about drinking binges as if they were badges of honor. Reporters ate it up, printing his bar tales alongside his movie promotions. To fans, the line between the actor and the characters he played disappeared. But the heavy drinking bled into his personal life. During his long relationship with Michelle Triola, alcohol-fueled arguments became explosive. When she later filed her famous palimony lawsuit in the 1970s, courtroom testimony pulled Marvin's drinking habits into the open. Witnesses spoke of his reliance on alcohol and the chaos it brought into their home. The press latched onto every detail, painting a picture of a man both larger than life and completely out of control. On set, co-stars carried memories of his binges. Some recalled him nursing bottles in his trailer between takes. Others remembered him stumbling during action scenes, then brushing it off with a joke. Producers tried to shield him, but the pattern followed him from film to film. Even with an Oscar to his name, Marvin never shook the barroom image. His rugged looks, gravelly voice, and swagger made it easy for people to believe he lived the same way off-camera. And in many ways, he did. Natalie Wood's cocktail habits. Dinner parties in the Hollywood Hills often carried the same rhythm. The host poured cocktails, guests mingled, and Natalie Wood reached for her glass again and again. Friends remembered her leaning on alcohol through the 1970s, rarely turning down a drink. What began as casual social drinking grew into a visible dependence. Biographers later noted how Wood's public appearances often included signs of intoxication. At industry gatherings, she was seen unsteady on her feet, sometimes slurring her words while greeting acquaintances. Colleagues whispered about her frequent disappearances during events, returning with a drink in hand to calm nerves that never seemed to leave her. The drinking wasn't only social. Friends recounted evenings where she arrived already tipsy, needing cocktails just to relax. Family members privately worried but avoided confronting her directly, fearing it would push her further into the habit. Alcohol, they said later, was her shield against anxiety and pressure. On set, the habit followed her. Crew members described days when she was slow to focus, her concentration dulled by late-night drinking. Directors worked around it, relying on her professionalism once the cameras rolled, but insiders admitted the cocktails were becoming harder to hide. The entertainment press occasionally hinted at the issue, though never directly. Tabloids wrote about her partying lifestyle without naming alcohol outright. But those in her inner circle confirmed that cocktails were more than just an accessory. They had become a coping mechanism in a career filled with constant scrutiny and personal struggles. The 1970s saw Wood juggling roles, motherhood, and a rocky marriage to Robert Wagner. Alcohol often accompanied the stress. At dinners, friends described her moving from one drink to the next as if it was routine. Guests sometimes tried to cut her off gently, only to be waved away with a smile. The tragic circumstances of her death in 1981 placed alcohol at the center once more. The coroner's report documented a blood alcohol level well above the legal driving limit. The detail reinforced what many already knew. Cocktails had been part of her life for years. Dudley Moore's decline. The television audience expected charm. Instead, they got a slurred interview. Dudley Moore, promoting one of his later projects in the 1980s, stumbled through answers, laughing off mistakes while clearly under the influence. Clips like this revealed what insiders already knew. The comedian famous for playing a lovable drunken Arthur was living the role off camera. During the height of his career, Moore balanced comedy, music, and acting with ease, but friends recalled how alcohol became a daily part of his life. On film sets, he often drank between takes. Co-stars described him showing up with a bottle close by, turning rehearsals into extended drinking sessions. For some productions, entire schedules had to be adjusted around his condition. What audiences thought was just an act in Arthur was close to reality. Colleagues from the set noted that Moore sometimes came to work already tipsy, needing little effort to appear drunk on screen. The role won him a Golden Globe, but privately, the success only deepened the pattern. His public appearances showed the toll. On talk shows, Moore sometimes rambled, cracked inappropriate jokes, or lost his train of thought. Viewers laughed nervously, unsure if it was part of the act. Friends later admitted they found it painful to watch, knowing alcohol was steering his behavior. By the mid-1980s, Moore's drinking was no longer something the industry could brush aside. Producers hesitated to cast him, worried about insurance and delays. Once hailed as one of Britain's great comic talents, he was now seen as unpredictable, another actor whose personal life overshadowed his work. Even in private life, alcohol left scars. Friends described him calling late at night, drunk and incoherent, needing company or help. Romantic relationships suffered under the strain, with partners citing drinking as a constant source of conflict. Moore's decline was especially visible because of the contrast. He had started as a talented musician, a skilled satirist, and an international film star. But by the time his health began failing in the 1990s, alcohol had already stripped much of that reputation away. Margot Hemingway's public downfall. Model arrested for drunk driving headlines like this followed Margot Hemingway through the 1980s. The granddaughter of Ernest Hemingway had launched as a fashion icon in the 1970s, gracing magazine covers and starring in films. But by the next decade, her name appeared more often in police reports than in casting calls. She was arrested multiple times for driving under the influence. Each incident splashed across tabloids. Photographers captured her leaving courthouses, sunglasses, hiding the toll of long nights. Interviews revealed a woman candid about her struggles, admitting alcohol had become both an escape and a trap. Rehab centers saw her come and go, but the cycle rarely broke. Public altercations kept the cameras on her. At bars, witnesses reported fights, shouting matches, and sudden exits when things got out of hand. Once a glamorous runway star, Margot was now portrayed as another celebrity in freefall, with alcohol fueling most of the headlines. Family history only added weight. Reporters tied her struggles to the Hemingway legacy of addiction and tragedy, drawing constant comparisons. Margot bristled at it, insisting she was her own person, but alcohol repeatedly dragged her back into the narrative. Even when she tried to stage comebacks, the press reminded audiences of the arrests and the drinking. By the early 1990s, the contrast between her past and present was stark. She had once commanded six-figure modeling contracts. Now she was photographed stumbling out of nightclubs or sitting in rehab waiting rooms. Casting directors avoided her, insurance companies refused to back her, and projects slipped away. Friends described moments of hope. Margot spoke about her desire to stay sober, and some stretches of recovery showed promise. Yet relapses followed, often accompanied by another arrest or tabloid spread. The public learned to expect another headline, another photo, another fall. In July 1996, her story ended abruptly. She was found dead in her apartment, the result of an overdose after years of battling addiction. For many, her death felt inevitable, a grim conclusion to a public life defined as much by alcohol as by beauty. Robin Williams' relapses. "I thought I could handle just a sip." That was how Robin Williams explained his return to drinking in the early 2000s after nearly 2 decades sober. The line became infamous in interviews, a reminder that relapse can happen even to someone at the top of their craft. Williams had quit alcohol and drugs in the early 1980s, when fame and fortune were threatening to overwhelm him. For years, he stayed clean. But while filming in Alaska in 2003, he admitted the isolation and boredom drove him back to the bottle. Once the door was opened, the habit grew quickly. Crew members on film sets noticed the change. Friends described him showing up with the smell of liquor on his breath, still able to perform but clearly struggling. Williams didn't hide it for long. He entered rehab, telling the press he needed to face the truth head-on. The public admired his honesty, but the relapse shocked fans who had believed he had left that part of his life behind. The pattern repeated more than once. In 2006, he checked into a treatment facility again, acknowledging he couldn't beat alcoholism alone. His wife at the time confirmed to reporters that he was committed to recovery, but Williams himself admitted the disease was lifelong. He called alcohol cunning and sneaky, a constant threat no matter how many years of sobriety he stacked. Comedy circles also witnessed the struggle. Fellow comedians recalled nights when Williams looked drained, the energy that defined his stage work dulled by drinking. Even in private dinners, he sometimes reached for a glass when he felt overwhelmed or anxious. Those close to him said it was heartbreaking to see someone so full of life weighed down by the same old enemy. Despite the setbacks, he fought publicly. Williams spoke often about addiction, using interviews to stress how relapse could hit anyone, no matter how successful. Fans respected the openness, and many recovering addicts pointed to his words as proof that shame wasn't the answer. Front pages called them geniuses one day and drunks the next. Studio bosses begged them to sober up, but the bars always won. Diana Barrymore's public collapse. She was supposed to be Hollywood royalty. The daughter of legendary actor John Barrymore, she had the looks and the name. Universal signed her in the early 1940s and promoted her as the new glamour girl. Magazine covers praised her, studios hyped her, and audiences were curious. But Diana inherited more than fame. She also inherited her father's taste for alcohol. By her early 20s, the drinking was already a problem. Friends recalled her showing up late to rehearsals, unsteady and slurring. Universal tried to protect their new star, but word spread. She partied more than she worked. Hotel managers remembered her throwing wild bashes that ended with broken furniture and complaints from neighbors. On set, she struggled. Co-stars said she often needed retakes, unable to focus through hangovers. Studios tried to pair her with big names, hoping it would hide her weaknesses. Instead, her reputation grew worse. By the mid-1940s, Diana's career was slipping. but her drinking was speeding up. The tabloids loved it. Headlines about her drunken escapades sold papers. She was arrested more than once for public intoxication and disorderly conduct. Each arrest chipped away at her image. In 1947, she married actor Robert Wilcox, himself a heavy drinker. Their fights, fueled by alcohol, were loud and public. Neighbors recalled screaming matches that ended with police being called. She divorced, remarried, and divorced again. Each marriage was marked by the same problem: alcohol. By the 1950s, she was broke, her Hollywood career long gone. She tried stage acting, but her behavior made her unreliable. Theater owners stopped hiring her. In 1957, Diana published her autobiography, Too Much, Too Soon. The book laid everything bare. She admitted to constant drinking, failed marriages, and wasted opportunities. Readers were shocked by her honesty. Hollywood wasn't. By then, nobody was hiring her. Her final years were bleak. She drifted through cheap hotels in New York, drinking heavily and surviving on what little money she had. On the 25th of January, 1960, she was found dead at 38. Reports listed drug and alcohol overdose as the cause. Wallace Reid's tragic collapse. He was billed as the screen's perfect lover. Handsome, athletic, and charming, he seemed unstoppable. Fans filled theaters just to see his smile. But behind the screen, Reid's body was failing. His escape was alcohol, and it mixed with something far worse. In 1919, Reid was injured while filming a train stunt. Studios didn't want to lose their moneymaker. Doctors prescribed morphine so he could keep working. Reid took the shots, but he also leaned on alcohol to dull the constant pain. Soon, he wasn't just medicating, he was dependent. Friends recalled him drinking before takes, during breaks, and after the cameras stopped. By 1922, his health was impossible to hide. He collapsed more than once on set. His skin turned pale, his body thin. He entered sanitariums where doctors tried to wean him off. Reporters camped outside, desperate for details. Hollywood's golden boy had become Hollywood's hidden shame. His wife, Dorothy Davenport, fought to save him. She stood by his side as he moved between hospitals, still battling both the bottle and the needle. Friends described Reid shaking with withdrawal, begging for relief. He promised to quit, but the cravings never stopped. Alcohol remained his crutch. On the 18th of January, 1923, Reid died at just 31 years old. The official cause was complications from his morphine addiction, but everyone knew alcohol helped speed the decline. His death shocked fans who couldn't believe their matinee idol was gone. Dorothy turned her grief into a campaign. She toured the country warning about the dangers of drugs and drink, calling her late husband the industry's first cautionary tale. Frances Farmer's drunken outbursts. Police blotters told part of her story. By the early 1940s, Frances Farmer's name appeared in headlines not for her acting, but for her drinking and the chaos that came with it. She had been one of Hollywood's most promising actresses, praised for her raw performances and rebellious independence. But alcohol turned her reputation from bold to dangerous. Farmer never fit the mold of a studio starlet. She resisted publicity stunts, clashed with executives, and sought challenging roles. Off-screen, she drank heavily. Friends recalled nights when she could outdrink everyone at the table, then stumble out looking for another bar. That defiance, combined with alcohol, became combustible. In October 1942, she was arrested for driving drunk in Santa Monica. Months later, another arrest followed, this time for public intoxication and disorderly conduct. When police tried to restrain her, she fought back. Court records describe her yelling at officers, kicking at furniture, and refusing to cooperate. Newspapers turned it into a spectacle, painting her as Hollywood's bad girl. Her career quickly unraveled. Studios that once called her a rising star dropped her. By 1943, she was in court again after a drunken fight at a hotel. A judge declared her unstable, and she was committed to psychiatric institutions. Alcohol wasn't the only factor. Mental health struggles were also present, but heavy drinking made every outburst worse. Farmer's time in institutions became the darkest chapter. Reports and later accounts suggest she was treated harshly, even abusively. Biographers note that her alcoholism was cited repeatedly in medical records as part of her decline. She was released only to be arrested again for drunken behavior. The cycle repeated through the 1940s. In later years, Farmer tried comebacks on stage and television, but interviews showed the toll. Her face was hardened, her voice raspy. She admitted she still drank, though never as openly as before. Directors rarely took the risk of hiring her. On the 1st of August, 1970, Frances Farmer died of esophageal cancer at 56. Heavy drinking had scarred her health long before the disease finished the job. William Holden's lonely end. He was one of the biggest stars of the 1950s. He won an Oscar for Stalag 17, 1953, and became a leading man in classics like Sunset Boulevard and The Bridge on the River Kwai. He had the looks, the voice, and the charisma. What he also had was a drinking problem that grew worse as the years went by. Holden drank through much of his career. On sets, co-stars recalled him sneaking liquor into his trailer. By the 1960s, it wasn't a secret anymore. His face looked bloated, his speech sometimes slurred. Producers grew frustrated with his tardiness and mood swings. Interviews made it even clearer. He often appeared tipsy on television, laughing too loudly, answering questions with glassy eyes. He admitted his problem, but he couldn't stop. Friends described him as a man who could drink all night, sleep a few hours, then start again. His marriages collapsed under the weight of it. His long relationship with actress Stephanie Powers was marked by concern over his drinking, but Holden brushed off warnings. The 1970s deepened his dependence. While filming The Towering Inferno, 1974, crew members noted his exhaustion and short temper, often fueled by hangovers. He spent more time at bars than on set, but his reputation as a seasoned actor kept him employed. Hollywood had learned to look the other way. Holden's health began to decline. His liver was damaged, and doctors urged him to quit. He didn't. By the early 1980s, his drinking sessions stretched late into the night, often alone. He preferred isolation, keeping company with a bottle more than with people. On the 12th of November, 1981, his lifestyle caught up to him. Alone in his Santa Monica apartment, Holden fell and struck his head on a table while intoxicated. The cut wasn't fatal by itself, but he never called for help. He bled out slowly, undiscovered for days. He was 63 years old. The news stunned Hollywood. A man once admired for charm and talent had died in silence, undone by alcohol and neglect. Barbara Payton's barroom ruin. The tabloids loved her downfall. By the mid-1950s, Barbara Payton's name was less about glamour and more about booze, fights, and arrests splashed across front pages. Just a few years earlier, she had been one of Hollywood's rising stars, acting opposite James Cagney in Kiss Tomorrow, Goodbye, 1950, and Gregory Peck in Only the Valiant, 1951. But alcohol dragged her career from red carpets to barrooms in record time. Payton came to Hollywood as a model-turned-actress with ambition. Studios saw her as a blonde bombshell who could rival Lana Turner. She had the roles, the press, and the looks. What she didn't have was control. By the early 1950s, her drinking was already a problem. Friends remembered nights when she knocked back glass after glass, only to start fights with whoever was closest. One scandal destroyed her career almost overnight. Payton left her fiancé, actor Franchot Tone, for tough guy star Tom Neal. The triangle exploded when Neal beat Tone so badly he was hospitalized. Hollywood was appalled. Payton's name was linked to violence, booze, and betrayal. Studios blacklisted her. The rest of the decade showed her spiral. Arrest reports detailed drunk driving charges, public intoxication, and brawls in cheap bars. Reporters often found her staggering in Hollywood neighborhoods, makeup smeared, clothes torn. She was photographed drunk and disheveled, her once glamorous image ruined. By the 1960s, she was broke. She published a memoir, I Am Not Ashamed, 1963, where she admitted to drinking herself into oblivion. The book was raw and shocking, but it didn't save her. She was reduced to hustling, living in rundown apartments, and drinking until she passed out. Neighbors later recalled her showing up barefoot in liquor stores, begging for credit. Police were often called when she caused scenes in public, shouting at strangers or collapsing on sidewalks. Her health collapsed with her reputation. Doctors diagnosed liver and heart damage from years of alcohol abuse. Barbara Payton died in 1967 at just 39. The cause was listed as heart and liver failure, both tied to alcohol. George C. Scott's on-set drunken fury. He was one of the most respected actors of his generation. His performance in Patton, 1970, earned him an Academy Award, which he famously refused. He was tough, uncompromising, and brilliant. He was also a heavy drinker whose behavior on set could be explosive. Scott's relationship with alcohol stretched back to his early career. By the 1960s, colleagues knew his temper was linked to drinking. He would show up to rehearsals already intoxicated. Directors tried to rein him in, but his talent kept him in demand. He could deliver lines with authority even after a long night at the bar. Still, the drinking was obvious. Crew members recalled him arriving on set with shaking hands and bloodshot eyes. His mood could flip without warning. One moment he was charming, the next he was in a rage. Producers learned to expect arguments, walkouts, and sometimes days of lost shooting because Scott was too drunk to continue. His reputation only grew after Patton. Offers poured in, but so did stories about his binges. During filming of The Hospital, 1971, he reportedly vanished on drinking sprees, forcing delays. Co-stars braced themselves for confrontations when he returned hungover and irritable. Many admired his raw skill, but dreaded working with him. Scott's marriages also showed the toll. His stormy relationship with actress Colleen Dewhurst was marked by fights fueled by alcohol. Friends remembered broken furniture and late-night shouting matches. He admitted later that his drinking poisoned his family life. Through the 1970s and 1980s, the cycle continued. Scott worked steadily, but every project carried risk. Some directors refused to hire him. Others built shooting schedules around his unpredictable habits. On good days, he delivered unforgettable performances. On bad days, he sabotaged his own work with drunken outbursts. Even in later life, the problem didn't disappear. He continued drinking heavily while his health declined. Doctors warned him repeatedly about his liver and heart. He ignored them. By the 1990s, his career had slowed and his body showed years of damage. George C. Scott died in 1999 at age 71. Official cause, an abdominal aortic aneurysm. But decades of drinking had left him frail and weakened. Margot Hemingway's fatal struggles. The Hemingway name carried weight. Ernest Hemingway was a Nobel Prize-winning author, but the family also carried a long shadow of addiction and mental illness. His granddaughter, Margot Hemingway, was supposed to represent a fresh start. Instead, alcohol and depression cut her career short and tied her to the family curse. Margot became one of the most famous models of the 1970s. Her face appeared on magazine covers around the world. She signed a $1 million contract with Fabergé, one of the biggest modeling deals of its time. Hollywood came calling, and she starred in Lipstick, 1976, marketed as a crossover star. Behind the glamour, alcohol followed her everywhere. Friends and colleagues recalled her drinking heavily during photo shoots and parties. Vodka was her constant companion. By the 1980s, her career was slipping. Modeling contracts dried up. Acting roles never came. She admitted in interviews that drinking had played a part in her decline. The family history made her struggles worse. Ernest Hemingway had taken his own life in 1961. Other relatives battled addiction and depression. Margot often said she felt trapped by the family legacy. Alcohol became a way to escape the pressure. Her sister Marielle later described nights when Margot drank until she passed out, then tried to laugh it off the next morning. By the 1990s, she was broke. She lost her homes and moved into small apartments. Tabloids wrote about her weight gain, her erratic behavior, and her fading looks. She tried rehab more than once, but relapsed every time. Friends said she seemed unable to quit. In July 1996, Margot Hemingway was found dead in her Santa Monica apartment just days after the 35th anniversary of her grandfather's death. She was 42. The coroner ruled it an overdose of barbiturates. Alcohol had been part of the struggle that led her there. In the end, she joined the long list of Hemingways undone by addiction. Dudley Moore's slow decline. He charmed audiences with his quick wit and piano skills. In the 1960s, he was one of Britain's most popular comedians, first gaining fame with Beyond the Fringe. Later, Hollywood made him an international star. But the same role that defined his career also highlighted the problem he couldn't escape: alcohol. In 1981, Moore starred in Arthur, playing a spoiled millionaire who was drunk in nearly every scene. The performance won him a Golden Globe and an Academy Award nomination. What audiences didn't realize was how close the act was to reality. Moore was drinking heavily off-screen. Friends and colleagues noticed the blurred line between character and lifestyle. Through the 1980s, his career flourished, but so did his reputation for hard drinking. Reporters spotted him leaving restaurants visibly intoxicated. Paparazzi snapped photos of him stumbling on sidewalks or being helped into cars. The tabloids thrived on stories of Moore's drunken escapades, which undercut his image as a lovable comedian. By the early 1990s, the consequences were clear. His once youthful looks faded, his speech sometimes slurred in interviews. Producers grew cautious. On sets, crew members whispered about his drinking. Moore's health took a steep downturn. What many assumed was just alcoholism, however, turned out to be more complicated. Doctors diagnosed him with progressive supranuclear palsy, PSP, a rare degenerative disease. But before the diagnosis became public, the symptoms were mistaken for drunkenness. His staggering walk, slurred speech, and clumsy movements led tabloids to report that Moore was constantly drunk. In truth, he was battling both illness and alcohol. The decline was cruel. Moore gave rambling television appearances, which viewers dismissed as drunken behavior. He was often humiliated in the press. Friends tried to protect him, but he struggled to manage the disease while still leaning on alcohol for relief. By the mid-1990s, his condition worsened. He left Hollywood and retreated into private care. In his final years, Moore was wheelchair-bound and unable to perform. He died in 2002 at age 66. Veronica Lake's final years. Once, she was the most copied woman in America. Veronica Lake's peekaboo hairstyle made her a 1940s icon, splashed across movie posters and fashion magazines, but the fame didn't last. By the 1950s, she wasn't known for glamour anymore. She was known for drinking. Lake rose fast in Hollywood. She starred in hits like This Gun for Hire, 1942, The Glass Key, 1942, and Sullivan's Travels, 1941. Audiences adored her. Studios promoted her as sultry, mysterious, and untouchable. Off-camera, though, her reputation was rocky. She clashed with directors, fought with co-stars, and drank heavily. Word spread that she was unreliable, and alcohol was at the center of it. Her career faltered after World War II. Paramount dropped her in 1948, citing her difficult behavior and fading box office. Without the studio system shielding her, Lake's habits became impossible to hide. She drank openly at bars in Los Angeles and New York. Paparazzi and gossip columnists reported on her binges, showing a star who had lost her shine. By the 1950s and 1960s, Lake's fall was complete. She was broke, divorced multiple times, and often homeless. At one point, she worked as a cocktail waitress and hotel maid in Manhattan, trying to survive while still drinking. Customers were stunned to see a former Hollywood star serving drinks while barely keeping herself together. Lake admitted her alcoholism in interviews. In her 1970 memoir Veronica, she wrote about how drinking destroyed her reputation and her health. She said bluntly, "I was a victim of myself." By then, her body was frail. Veronica Lake died in 1973 at just 50 years old in Vermont. Doctors listed acute hepatitis and renal failure as the causes, both tied to years of drinking. Ben Affleck's public struggles. He rose to fame in the late 1990s with Good Will Hunting, Armageddon, and Shakespeare in Love. He won an Academy Award for screenwriting at just 25. He had the career, the looks, and the star power, but like many before him, alcohol became the shadow he could not shake. Affleck has said his drinking began in his teens, long before Hollywood. By the early 2000s, it was part of his lifestyle. He checked into rehab in 2001, telling friends he wanted to get ahead of the problem. For a while, it seemed under control. His career surged with directing success in Gone Baby Gone and Argo, which won Best Picture in 2013. Publicly, he looked like a comeback story. Privately, alcohol was still there. In 2017, Affleck admitted in a Facebook post that he had completed treatment again. He wrote that he wanted to be the best father I can be and thanked his family for support. That honesty drew sympathy. But within 2 years, another relapse made headlines. In 2019, paparazzi captured him stumbling outside a Halloween party in Los Angeles, visibly drunk. The footage went viral. Affleck later told reporters, "It happens, it was a slip." His struggles didn't end there. In 2020, he gave a rare, candid interview to the New York Times. He admitted drinking had wrecked his marriage to Jennifer Garner and called it the biggest regret of my life. Garner had staged interventions, driven him to rehab, and supported him through recovery. But Affleck kept falling back. Even while promoting films, his drinking often followed him. Paparazzi caught him at casinos late at night, escorted out after gambling binges. Photos of him looking exhausted, coffee in hand, became tabloid staples. Unlike stars of old Hollywood, his addiction played out under constant cameras. Every slip was broadcast worldwide. Affleck has continued to work, starring in The Way Back 2020, a story about a former basketball player battling alcoholism. The role mirrored his own struggles. He called filming it cathartic, admitting he poured his life into the performance. Ben Affleck's fight with alcohol is still ongoing. Unlike others on this list, his story is not finished.
It would all start with a shot, then a glass, then it'll grow into a bottle, then 2 bottles. A lot of our favorite classic Hollywood stars had some vices that they were hiding from the cameras. The most dangerous was alcohol. Bottle by bottle, some of these stars were drowning in misery and addiction, but none of their fans had any idea. In this list, you'd be exposed to some of the Hollywood stars who fell victim to the tyranny of alcohol, who they were beforehand, and how they tried to navigate the hardships until their untimely demise. Jack Kerouac. In the heart of Lowell, Massachusetts, where the city's pulse beat with the rhythm of industry, a literary maestro named Jack Kerouac emerged into the world on March 12, 1922. From these modest beginnings, he later grew to become a voice destined to echo throughout the world. Growing up in a simple mill town, Kerouac's early years were marked by the hum of looms and the simplicity of immigrant life. However, as a wanderer at heart, his restless spirit found solace in the written word. He was a gifted writer with an insatiable curiosity, so he would write about topics and happenings in society, from life to drugs, and even the harsh reality of poverty. His words painted vivid portraits of a generation questioning societal norms, and his unique writing style became a beacon for those seeking a different path. However, hidden beneath the weave, his brilliance was a shadow that would ultimately dim the glow of his literary legacy. Kerouac's gift came intertwined with a severe drinking problem, a relentless companion that dogged his footsteps through the alleys of inspiration and the valleys of despair. His alcohol intake was excessive, but he used it as a coping mechanism to navigate the intricacies of Hollywood. Soon enough, fate had a horrible plan for him. One fateful evening, Kerouac's world took a harrowing turn. First, it started as a wave of nausea. The room spun, and the air grew thick with the weight of impending tragedy. He began vomiting blood, and everyone around him knew that whatever was going on was horrible. And so there was a desperate dash to the hospital, but sadly it became the last desperate act in the life of the great Jack Kerouac. Sadly, on October 21st, 1969, the final chapter in Kerouac's tumultuous narrative unfolded. A hemorrhage, the cruel consequence of cirrhosis, claimed the writer's life at the tender age of 47. Billie Holiday. In the vibrant city of Baltimore, on April 7, 1915, Eleanora Fagan was born. Destined for greatness, she would later become renowned as Billie Holiday, an enduring luminary within the realm of jazz, though inexorably tethered to the shadows of personal turmoil. Billie's formative years unfolded against a backdrop of adversity, navigating poverty and confronting the harsh realities of racial segregation. In the evocative ambiance of Baltimore's jazz establishments, she discovered her prodigious gift, a voice destined to redefine the very essence of jazz. The trajectory of Billy's ascent from the streets of Baltimore to international acclaim attested to her unparalleled musical prowess. Her voice, an instrument resonating with raw emotion, traversed a spectrum from heart-rending blues to invigorating swing. Her ability to imbue each note with a soul-stirring depth that transcended conventional genre boundaries captivated the world. However, beneath the mellifluous strains of her music loomed the specter of personal struggles. Billie Holiday, the esteemed Lady Day of jazz, grappled persistently with substance addiction. The insidious influence of heroin and alcohol threatened to eclipse the brilliance of her artistic endeavors, casting a pall over her life. In the waning phase of her illustrious career, the toll exacted by a life lived on the precipice of self-destructive tendencies became increasingly conspicuous. The evocative notes that had once flowed effortlessly from her vocal cords now mirrored the challenges etched upon her countenance. Repeated arrests on drug-related charges rendered Billie a tragic symbol of the perils associated with both fame and the relentless pursuit of escapism. July 17, 1959, marked the denouement of Billie Holiday's tumultuous odyssey. A constellation of health issues, exacerbated by prolonged substance abuse, culminated in her premature demise at the age of 44. The world mourned the loss of one of its most iconic voices. Hank Williams. In the rustic town of Mount Olive, Alabama, on September 17, 1923, a musical prodigy named Hiram King, Hank Williams, came into the world. He would become a very strong figure as far as country music was concerned. His impact in the entertainment industry would ring through the halls of Hollywood, and his voice and soulful compositions left a mark on the genre. Williams's early years were imbued with the strains of Southern life, but despite his environment, he harnessed the heartache and joy of his surroundings, transmuting them into the timeless narratives that would define country music for generations to come. The trajectory of Hank's musical journey saw him rise from local radio shows to the grand stages of the Grand Ole Opry. His compositions, marked by an authenticity that resonated with the everyday struggles of common folk, elevated him to the status of a revered troubadour. With hits like Lovesick Blues and I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, Hank Williams etched his name into the annals of country music history. Yet beneath the luminescence of his musical success lurked the shadows of personal challenges. Hank Williams, the country music luminary, grappled with the tumultuous currents of addiction. His reliance on alcohol and prescription drugs became a persistent undercurrent, complicating his meteoric rise and contributing to a life marked by peaks and valleys. Tragically, the final verse of Hank Williams's life unfolded on January 1, 1953. A journey that began in the heart of Alabama met its untimely end in the backseat of a Cadillac en route to a concert in Canton, Ohio. The cause, acute heart failure compounded by a lethal cocktail of prescription drugs, bore the tragic imprints of a life teetering on the precipice of self-destruction. At the tender age of 29, Hank Williams left a void in country music that time has yet to fill. His contributions, however, endure as an enduring testament to the transformative power of authentic storytelling through music. The lonesome whine of his steel guitar may have faded away, but the resonating impact of Hank Williams' legacy continues to echo through the vast landscapes of country music, an eternal tribute to the troubadour who sang from the heart for the world to connect to. John Bonham. Born as John Henry Bonham on May 31, 1948, was an iconic English musician renowned as the drumming powerhouse behind the legendary rock band Led Zeppelin. Celebrated for his unparalleled speed, potent drumming power, rapid single-footed kick drum technique, distinctive sonic imprint, and an innate feel for groove, Bonham stands as a pinnacle figure among the greatest and most influential drummers in the annals of music history. Dorothy Dandridge. Born on November 9, 1922 in Cleveland, Ohio, carved her place in Hollywood history as the first African-American woman to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress. Despite her groundbreaking achievements, her life was marked by personal and professional challenges that eventually contributed to her tragic demise at the age of 42 in 1965. Dorothy Dandridge's career trajectory was notable for its highs and lows. In the 1940s and 1950s, she found success in films such as Carmen Jones in 1954, which earned her the aforementioned Oscar nomination. Dandridge's talent and beauty made her a trailblazer in an industry that was often reluctant to acknowledge the contributions of African American performers. However, despite her success, she faced racial discrimination, limited opportunities, and the challenges of navigating Hollywood's segregated landscape. Behind the scenes, Dandridge grappled with personal demons, including issues related to alcohol. The pressures of fame, coupled with the racial prejudices of the time, took a toll on her mental and emotional well-being. Her marriage to Harold Nicholas, one half of the renowned Nicholas Brothers dance duo, ended in divorce in 1951. The subsequent financial strain and custody battles over her daughter Harolyn intensified the challenges she faced. The 1950s witnessed a decline in Dandridge's career, attributed in part to the limited roles available for African American actresses during that era. Facing financial difficulties and emotional turmoil, Dandridge sought solace in alcohol, contributing to a downward spiral in her personal life. By the early 1960s, Dorothy Dandridge faced a series of setbacks, both professionally and personally. She struggled to secure meaningful roles in an industry still grappling with racial biases. Financial hardships mounted, and her battle with alcohol intensified. Tragically, on September 8, 1965, Dandridge was found dead in her West Hollywood apartment. Her demise was officially ruled as an accidental overdose, with barbiturate identified as the cause. While alcoholism was not the sole factor contributing to her demise, it was one element in a complex web of challenges that included racial prejudice, financial strain, and mental health struggles. Thomas Ince. Born on November 6, 1882 in Newport, Rhode Island, was a cinematic pioneer whose impact on the early days of Hollywood's silent era was indelible. As a film producer, director, and innovator, Ince played a crucial role in shaping the trajectory of the burgeoning film industry. Ince's career soared during a time of rapid growth and experimentation in the film world. He co-founded Inceville, the first major studio in Culver City, and became known for implementing production techniques that laid the groundwork for modern filmmaking. Ince's keen business acumen and artistic contributions established him as a key figure in the evolution of Hollywood. Tragically, Thomas Ince's life was abruptly cut short at the age of 44 in 1924, shrouded in mysterious circumstances that would fuel enduring speculation. Officially attributed to heart failure, the circumstances surrounding his demise sparked rumors and controversy. Some theories suggested that alcohol might have played a role, adding a layer of intrigue to the narrative. The lack of clarity surrounding Ince's passing only deepened the mystery. Some accounts even proposed alternative scenarios, including rumors of foul play and elaborate cover-ups. The ambiguous nature of the situation allowed speculation to flourish, and questions lingered over whether there was more to Ince's demise than initially met the eye. The connection between Ince's lifestyle, health, and ultimate demise became a subject of fascination and debate. The allure of Hollywood's golden age often comes intertwined with tales of enigma and scandal, and Thomas Ince's untimely demise became a chapter in this complex narrative. As the film industry continued to evolve, the legend of Thomas Ince endured, not only for his contributions to cinema, but also for the mysterious circumstances that surrounded his departure from that stage of life. Dana Plato. Born on November 7, 1964 in Maywood, California, rose to prominence as a child actress in the late 1970s on the popular television sitcom Different Strokes. However, despite the early success and recognition, Plato's life would ultimately take a tragic turn, marked by a tumultuous adulthood marred by substance abuse and, notably, issues with alcohol. As a young actress, Plato portrayed the character Kimberly Drummond, the adoptive daughter of the wealthy character Mr. Drummond, on Different Strokes. The show's popularity thrust her into the limelight, but the pressures of fame, combined with personal struggles, foreshadowed the difficulties that lay ahead. Plato's transition from child star to adulthood proved challenging, and she faced the inevitable pitfalls that have befallen many young actors navigating the precarious terrain of Hollywood's expectations. Subsequently, she grappled with various personal and professional setbacks that contributed to a decline in her career. Notably, substance abuse, including alcohol, emerged as a formidable challenge in Dana Plato's life. The coping mechanisms she employed to navigate the complexities of fame and personal issues ultimately became destructive forces. The impact of addiction was evident in her struggles to sustain a stable and healthy life. Tragically, on May 8, 1999, at the age of 34, Dana Plato's life was cut short by a drug overdose and excessive alcohol. The circumstances surrounding her death underscored the devastating consequences of addiction, and the untimely loss served as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities that accompany a life spent in the public eye. Jean Seberg. Born on November 13, 1938, Jean Seberg was an American actress celebrated for her captivating performances in films such as Breathless and Bonjour Tristesse. Despite her cinematic success, Seberg's life unfolded against a backdrop of profound personal challenges, including relentless battles with mental health issues and the ravages of alcoholism. Seberg's entree into the film industry marked a meteoric rise, with her portrayal of the free-spirited Patricia in Breathless solidifying her status as an icon of the French New Wave. However, the pressures of fame, coupled with personal struggles, cast a long shadow over her burgeoning career. As Seberg navigated the complexities of Hollywood, the tumult within her personal life became increasingly pronounced. Mental health challenges weighed heavily on her, and the coping mechanisms she sought included a descent into the throes of alcoholism. The solace she may have sought in the dazzling lights of fame was overshadowed by the inner turmoil that plagued her. On August 30, 1979, at the age of 40, Jean Seberg's journey tragically came to an end. While officially ruled as self-inflicted, her struggles with substance abuse, particularly alcohol, were acknowledged as contributing factors to her untimely demise. The narrative of her life, once adorned with the glimmer of cinematic brilliance, became a poignant tale of the fragility that often accompanies the veneer of fame. Jean Seberg's legacy endures not only for her contributions to film, but also as a symbol of the struggles faced by those navigating the demanding landscape of celebrity. Her story serves as a stark reminder of the impact of mental health challenges and addiction on even the most talented and acclaimed individuals in the world of cinema, underscoring the complex intersection of personal battles and public personas. Montgomery Clift. Born on October 17, 1920, was heralded as a gifted actor known for his compelling and intense performances. Behind the captivating facade of Hollywood's leading man, Clift wrestled with personal demons, contending with profound struggles that extended into the realms of alcohol and substance abuse. The nuanced depth of Clift's acting set him apart, earning him acclaim for roles in films such as A Place in the Sun and From Here to Eternity. However, the shadows of his challenges loomed large, and the pressures of stardom exacerbated an ongoing battle with alcoholism. As Clift navigated the demanding landscape of Hollywood, the weight of his internal struggles manifested in a tumultuous relationship with substances. Alcohol, in particular, became a companion on his tumultuous journey, contributing to the erosion of his well-being. On July 23, 1966, at the age of 45, Montgomery Clift's life was cut short. While his demise was not solely attributed to alcohol, it undeniably played a role in the overall decline that marked his later years. The complexity of Clift's narrative lies not only in the brilliance he brought to the silver screen, but also in the shadows that obscured his personal life, emphasizing the intricate interplay between talent, fame, and the profound toll of addiction. Montgomery Clift's legacy serves as a poignant exploration of the fragility that can accompany artistic brilliance. His story illuminates the challenges faced by those navigating the often unforgiving terrain of Hollywood, a tale of triumph and tragedy that transcends the boundaries of the roles he so memorably portrayed. John Garfield. Born on March 4, 1913, Garfield faced not only the pressures of the demanding film industry, but also the tumultuous political climate of the McCarthy era. Amid his thriving career, Garfield encountered personal challenges that extended beyond the silver screen. The political climate of the time cast a shadow over the entertainment industry, and Garfield found himself ensnared in the web of McCarthyism. Accused of having leftist affiliations, he became one of the many artists blacklisted during this dark period in American history. The strain of political scrutiny, coupled with the inherent stresses of a high-profile career, took a toll on Garfield's well-being. His struggles with alcohol, used as a coping mechanism for the mounting pressures, contributed to his declining health. The convergence of personal and professional turmoil became a crucible, testing the fortitude of a man who had once illuminated the screen with his charisma. Tragically, on May 21, 1952, at the age of 39, John Garfield's journey was cut short. The cause of death was a heart attack, a poignant manifestation of the toll exacted by the weight of external pressures and internal battles. The classic Hollywood era lost not only a remarkable actor, but also a figure whose life embodied the complexities of navigating fame, politics, and personal struggles during a tumultuous period in American history. Bix Beiderbecke. Born on March 10, 1903 in Davenport, Iowa, was a jazz cornetist whose musical genius left an indelible mark on the jazz landscape of the 1920s. His career was nothing short of meteoric, characterized by brilliance, innovation, and a unique approach to jazz improvisation that set him apart from his contemporaries. Beiderbecke's musical journey unfolded during the Roaring Twenties, a period marked by cultural dynamism and the flourishing of jazz. As a cornet player, he showcased an exceptional talent for improvisation and an innate ability to infuse his music with emotion and innovation. His contributions to the Chicago jazz scene, particularly with the Wolverines and Gene Goldkett's orchestra, solidified his reputation as one of the era's most influential musicians. However, amidst the symphony of success, Bix Beiderbecke battled personal demons, chief among them being alcoholism. The vibrant jazz age, with its allure and excesses, took a toll on Beiderbecke's health. His struggle with alcohol became increasingly pronounced, affecting both his personal life and professional engagements. Tragically, on August 6, 1931, at the young age of 28, Bix Beiderbecke's life was cut short. Complications related to his ongoing battle with alcoholism contributed to his untimely demise. The jazz world mourned the loss of a virtuoso whose innovative spirit and lyrical brilliance had the potential to reshape the trajectory of jazz music. Bix Beiderbecke's legacy extends beyond the brevity of his years. Despite his short life, his influence on jazz remains profound. His innovative approach to improvisation and his unique sound continues to inspire musicians, making him a revered figure in the history of American music. The tragic intertwining of brilliance and personal struggle in Beiderbecke's story serves as a poignant reminder of the complexities that often accompany artistic genius. If you enjoyed this video, you'd love the riveting Adrienne Barbeau facts that we have compiled for you. Check it out here. They were praised, paid, and plastered on every billboard. But off-camera, they were drowning in vodka, in pressure, in pain. No one dared to stop. This is what it looked like when the fame didn't fix anything. Buster Keaton's silent struggles. He was one of the biggest stars of the silent film era, stone-faced, brilliant, a master of physical comedy. But once sound came in, everything started falling apart, including him. In 1928, he signed with MGM. That deal killed his freedom. Studios now controlled his scripts, his stunts, and eventually his drinking. He didn't take it well. At first, it was casual, just a few drinks after work. Then it turned into drinking on set. Then it never stopped. By 1930, Buster was showing up hungover, forgetting lines, and walking through scenes like a ghost.
directors had to cut around him. His timing, once perfect, was gone. He started drinking whiskey in his dressing room between takes. Some days he didn't know where he was. Others, he just didn't care. He tried to hide it, but people noticed. His wife left him in 1932. He lost access to his kids. He went on drinking binges that lasted days. At one point, MGM assigned a full-time assistant just to keep him from falling apart mid-scene. Things hit rock bottom in 1934. Buster was found wandering the street, drunk and confused. He was committed to a sanitarium for exhaustion, but it was really to dry out. He escaped in a straitjacket, literally, climbed out a window and vanished. For the next few years, he was broke and out of work. He took whatever roles he could, often uncredited or in low-budget shorts. He kept drinking. His friends said he was lost, but they didn't know how to help. Rehab wasn't really a thing back then. You either pulled yourself together or you disappeared. In the early 1940s, something changed. He met a woman named Eleanor Norris. She was 20 years younger and didn't drink. Somehow, she helped him stop. Slowly, Buster came back. He started writing again, got some TV gigs, even returned to MGM as a gag writer. He never drank like that again. Tallulah Bankhead's martini mornings. She wasn't quiet about anything, not her politics, not her lovers, and definitely not her drinking. She drank like it was her job. Breakfast started with a martini. Lunch included more. By dinner, no one could count. She grew up wealthy and wild, raised in Alabama high society. By her 20s, she was already famous on Broadway. Hollywood came calling in the 1930s, but she didn't care much for rules. Studios asked her to tone it down. She didn't. Tallulah lit cigarettes during takes, refused to stick to the script, and drank openly on set. One producer said directing her was like trying to hold water in a net. She laughed it off. She always did. If someone mentioned the hangovers, she said, "Don't be silly. I never get hangovers. I get applause." She could be brilliant when she was focused. In The Little Foxes on stage, she played the lead role to rave reviews. But one night, she collapsed halfway through the performance. A stagehand said she'd downed 2 martinis and half a flask before curtain. The audience waited, curtain stayed closed, and Tallulah was carried out the back door. She didn't hide it. In fact, she leaned into it. On talk shows, she sipped whiskey and answered questions with slurred charm. Reporters wrote about her fabulous wreckage. She loved the drama. She called herself the world's most fabulous drunk. But it wasn't always funny. Friends said she'd disappear for days. Some weekends ended in hospitals. One doctor warned her she was drinking herself sick. She shrugged and lit another cigarette. By the 1950s, her film roles were drying up. Her voice was gravel. Her timing was off. Directors stopped calling. She stayed famous mostly for being Tallulah, loud, drunk, and outrageous. She never fully stopped drinking. Even in her later years, she was still sipping bourbon before interviews and talking circles around younger actors. But her body gave out. Liver issues, lung problems, weight loss. She died in 1968 at age 66, alone in her apartment. The cause? Pneumonia, worsened by years of heavy drinking and smoking. Billie Holiday's Booze and Blues. She had one of the most haunting voices in music history. But off stage, she fought a constant war with racism, heartbreak, and a bottle that never left her side. She started drinking young, working in nightclubs where liquor flowed like water. By the late 1930s, she was a star. Her voice could stop a room. Songs like Strange Fruit hit hard. But backstage, Billie drank to calm her nerves before shows. It started with gin, then brandy, then anything she could get her hands on. In the early 1940s, her fame exploded. So did her addiction. She was drinking before sets, between songs, and after every show. Friends said she was never fully sober. Club owners noticed too. Some nights, she forgot lyrics. Other nights, she couldn't stand. She was arrested for possession in 1947, but alcohol was always the quieter demon. Her cabaret card was revoked in New York, which meant she couldn't perform in any venue that served alcohol. That wiped out most of her income. Still, she drank. In hotel rooms, she'd sneak liquor into orange juice bottles. On the road, she hid flasks in makeup bags. Her manager tried cutting her off. She fired him. Her voice, though strained, still pulled crowds. But her memory started slipping, her temper got worse, and her drinking kept going. By 1956, she wrote a memoir. Parts of it were censored. The rest told the story of a woman in pain. In interviews, she brushed off the drinking. "I drink because I need to forget," she once said. "Some people pray. I pour." The final years were brutal. She was often broke, blacklisted, and barely functioning. In 1959, she collapsed in her New York apartment. At the hospital, they found cirrhosis, kidney failure, and fluid in her lungs. She was 44. The police showed up while she was still in bed and arrested her again for drug possession. They even posted a guard at her door. She died days later with just 70 cents in her bank account. Her voice lives on, but Billie never made peace with the bottle. The music soared. She didn't. Robert Walker's Vodka Breakdown. He had the charm, the looks, and a rising career in the 1940s. He also had vodka in his trailer, vodka in his coffee, and vodka in his veins. By the time he gave his most iconic performance, he was already falling apart. His big break came in Since You Went Away, 1944, where he starred opposite his real-life ex-wife, Jennifer Jones. It wasn't just awkward, but it was brutal. The divorce had crushed him, and he started drinking more to cope. Crew members said he shook between takes and sometimes needed help walking to set. The booze made him unpredictable. One day he was polite and professional. The next, he'd explode over nothing. He fought with directors, slurred his lines, threw furniture. MGM tried to protect him, but he was becoming a liability. In 1948, he had a breakdown on set and was admitted to the Menninger Clinic, a psychiatric hospital. The official reason was emotional exhaustion. The real reason was that he was drinking himself sick. Doctors put him on sedatives to calm his nerves. He promised to quit. He didn't. He made a short comeback in 1951 with Strangers on a Train. It was his best role, chilling, sharp, unforgettable. He played a charming psychopath. The scary part? He didn't need to stretch. Friends said he barely had to act. Alfred Hitchcock kept the camera rolling even when Walker went off script. But behind the scenes, things were still bad. He was mixing alcohol with barbiturates. He didn't sleep. He stopped eating. Some nights he called friends sobbing, convinced his life was over. In August 1951, a doctor came to his home to sedate him during one of his episodes. He was given amobarbital to calm down. He never woke up. Officially, it was an accidental reaction. Unofficially, it was alcohol, stress, and too many pills in a body that couldn't take it anymore. Robert Walker was just 32. He had 2 sons, a hit film in theaters, and a reputation that Hollywood couldn't figure out. One reviewer called him a star who burned too fast and left nothing behind but questions. The only thing more tragic than his performance was how close it was to the real thing, Diana Barrymore's broken dynasty. She was born into fame. Her father was John Barrymore, a legendary actor and legendary drunk. She got both of those traits. At first, it looked like she'd make it big. In the early 1940s, Universal Studios signed her with headlines calling her the next big Barrymore. She had the name, the face, and enough talent to turn heads. But behind it, she was already drinking hard, just like her father. She started missing rehearsals. Sometimes she'd show up so hungover production had to cancel. On stage, she slurred lines. Off stage, she collapsed in dressing rooms. One night, during a performance of Romantic Mr. Dickens, she walked off mid-scene and never returned. No explanation. Just left. By 1944, her career had stalled. Universal quietly dropped her. She married a few times, but each relationship fell apart, usually under the weight of booze and shouting matches. One ex-husband said living with her was like riding a train with no brakes. She tried Broadway again, but the drinking got in the way. Crew members hid liquor bottles backstage just to keep her sober during shows. It didn't work. Critics noticed. One review said she looked tired before she even opened her mouth. In 1957, she published a memoir called Too Much, Too Soon. It told everything: the drinking, the blackouts, the hospital stays, the suicide attempts, the family name that opened every door and then crushed her once she walked through. It sold well, but nothing changed. That same year, Warner Brothers adapted her memoir into a film. She didn't star in it. She didn't even consult. While the movie played in theaters, Diana was living in a rundown apartment, broke and drinking again. In 1960, her housekeeper found her in bed, surrounded by pills and empty bottles. The autopsy listed natural causes, but doctors said it was years of alcohol and sedatives. She was 38. She once said, "Everyone expects me to be a Barrymore, but I don't know what that means anymore." She wanted to live up to the name. Instead, it buried her. Truman Capote's talk show spirals. He wrote one of the greatest true crime books ever printed. In Cold Blood made him a literary star. But by the 1970s, most people didn't see him as a writer. They saw him as a drunk guest on late-night TV. Capote was always eccentric. But once fame hit hard, so did the partying. He was a regular at Studio 54, known for sipping chilled vodka out of tiny crystal glasses and slurring insults at whoever got too close. He called it research. Friends called it a meltdown. He didn't hide it. On the Dick Cavett Show, he showed up visibly drunk and rambled through his answers. On The Tonight Show, he flirted with Johnny Carson, made fun of other guests, and then forgot where he was. It became a pattern: invite Truman, expect a mess. Publishers started pulling back. One editor said his writing got sloppy and mean. He had promised a massive novel called Answered Prayers, meant to be his masterpiece. But when excerpts came out, they didn't land. Critics called them petty and cruel. Friends stopped returning his calls. Capote responded the only way he knew how. He drank more. By the early 80s, things had gotten grim. He bounced between friends' guest rooms and upscale rehab centers. He didn't last long in either. Sometimes he was funny and charming. Other times he screamed at nurses and trashed hotel rooms. One friend found him in a robe on the floor, drinking out of a vase. In 1984, he moved into the home of Joanne Carson, Johnny Carson's ex-wife. She tried to help him dry out. It didn't work. On August 25th, he died in her guest room from liver failure, complicated by drug and alcohol use. He was 59. He used to say he wanted to be remembered for his words. In the end, it was the slurred ones people remembered most. Sam Peckinpah's bloody cocktails. He made violent, brilliant films. He also made enemies on set, passed out in editing rooms, and drank like the credits depended on it. In the 1960s, he directed The Wild Bunch, a western so bloody and stylish it changed the genre. But behind the camera, Sam was already deep into drinking. He kept vodka in a water bottle and whiskey in his coat. Cast and crew said he would sip through takes, bark orders mid-slur, and forget what scene they were filming. At first, producers tolerated it. His films made money and his chaos sometimes added edge, but by the 1970s, he was spiraling. On Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, 1973, he fought with the studio, missed deadlines, and drank from morning to night. Crew members found him asleep in the editing room, drooling on reels. He didn't deny it. In interviews, he joked that bourbon was his assistant director. When critics asked why his films were so violent, he said, "I'm just showing what's real." The truth was, he was barely hanging on. Studios started to panic. They began assigning shadow editors to finish his films behind his back. His name still appeared on the credits, but much of the work was done without him. He lashed out, but the studios held the power and the checkbook. By the early 1980s, he was taking whatever work he could get. He directed a few music videos. One was for Julian Lennon. Between takes, he drank alone in his trailer, coughing and shaking. His hands were too unsteady to hold a camera. He gave orders from a folding chair. Sam Peckinpah died in 1984 from heart failure. Doctors pointed to years of alcohol abuse as a major cause. Edward Furlong's fast fall. He was just 14 when he landed Terminator 2. Overnight, he became one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. But as fast as the fame came, the drinking followed. By the late 90s, Furlong's teen idol days were over, and he was drinking hard. It wasn't just beer at parties. Friends said he'd start the day with vodka and keep it going until he passed out. He still landed roles, American History X, Detroit Rock City, but directors had to work around his behavior. He'd show up late, forget lines, or vanish during breaks. The press caught on. In 2001, he was arrested for trying to free lobsters from a tank in a Kentucky grocery store, drunk, of course. The charges were dropped, but it made headlines. He laughed it off. Then he got arrested again and again. In 2004, he entered rehab. It didn't stick. Later that year, he was spotted staggering out of a club in Los Angeles, glassy-eyed and barely able to stand. Paparazzi caught the whole thing. He tried to stay out of sight, but the photos followed him everywhere. Then came the restraining orders. His ex-girlfriend accused him of violence while intoxicated. In 2010, he was banned from seeing his son after testing positive for alcohol. The court records show a pattern: relapse, arrest, rehab, repeat. Studios stopped calling. He lost the role in Terminator 3. By 2013, he was facing jail time and showed up in court looking pale, bloated, and exhausted. The judge ordered another rehab stint, his fifth. In 2019, he claimed to be sober and was briefly brought back for Terminator. Dark fate, though his appearance was limited to digital footage. He said it felt like a second chance. Whether it stuck is unclear. Mischa Barton's vodka fog. In the early 2000s, she was everywhere. After the OC launched her to fame, she became a fashion icon, a tabloid fixture, and a regular on red carpets. But behind the flashes and premieres, the drinking was building fast. She was only 17 when the show started. By 19, she was hitting LA clubs almost nightly. Paparazzi followed her from bar to bar. Photos showed her stumbling out of back doors, getting into cars barefoot, or clutching energy drinks that weren't just energy. Friends said vodka was her go-to. In 2007, it all caught up with her. On December 27th, she was pulled over in West Hollywood. She had no license, failed a sobriety test, and was charged with DUI. Officers found illegal substances and an open bottle of alcohol in the car. She was booked, photographed, and released the next morning. The story made national headlines. She entered rehab shortly after, claiming it was for exhaustion. But insiders said it was about more than that. Her behavior had become erratic. She stopped showing up for meetings, lost roles, burned bridges. Even her management team backed away. In 2009, things took a darker turn. Police were called to her LA home for a mental health check. She was placed on an involuntary psychiatric hold. Later, she said the incident was triggered by stress and medication, but alcohol was still in the picture. Over the next few years, she tried to rebuild, but the pattern didn't break. More nights out, more shaky interviews. On The Hill's New Beginnings in 2019, she opened up about how fame and pressure pushed her into unhealthy habits. She didn't name the substances, but the implication was clear. Barton said she wanted to stay sober, but her history was hard to ignore. For a long time, she wasn't an actress in control. She was a walking headline. The stardom came fast. The crash came faster. Mischa didn't just lose momentum. She got swallowed by the fog. Shia LaBeouf's unraveling on-screen. He didn't just party. He unraveled in public. The arrests, meltdowns, and blackouts, alcohol was behind nearly all of it. After Transformers made him a global name, Shia drank hard behind the scenes. On the set of Lawless, 2012, he admitted he got drunk on real moonshine to get into character. "I didn't know any other way to do it," he said. Co-stars noticed. He was erratic, unpredictable, sometimes slurring before lunch. That same year, he was spotted at a London pub stumbling into fights and being escorted out. The footage made the rounds online. His team blamed stress. Fans blamed the bottle. In 2014, things got worse. At a performance of Cabaret in New York, he was arrested for smoking indoors, shouting at the cast, and slapping someone on the rear. He was reportedly drunk when police arrived and had to be fitted with a face mask at the station. The next day, he apologized. A week later, he was drinking again. More arrests followed. In 2015, police picked him up in Austin, Texas, after he ran through traffic screaming at strangers. Officers said he smelled like booze and couldn't stand still. He tried rehab, then relapsed. Over and over. In 2017, a viral video showed him cursing out officers during a drunken outburst in Savannah, Georgia. "You're going to hell, straight to hell," he said, slurring and red-eyed. It wasn't his first arrest that year, or his last. He later admitted he was drinking to deal with fear. "I didn't want to be an actor anymore," he said. "I wanted to disappear." Instead, he kept showing up in headlines, drunk, damaged, and out of control. Therapists diagnosed him with PTSD and complex trauma. Rehab helped briefly, then more court dates, more apologies. Even when sober, the damage lingered. Studios backed off, collaborators cut ties. In recent years, he's claimed sobriety, said he's working on himself, but the past is heavy. The footage, the police records, the slurred interviews, they're still out there. Shia once said he used alcohol to numb the noise. The problem was, it just made everything louder. Some Hollywood stars weren't just heavy drinkers, they were so drunk they had to be carried onto set. Others slurred their lines, forgot entire movies they starred in, or even died with a drink in their hand. This is the dark side of fame, the actors who were completely wasted at all times. John Barrymore. He wasn't just a star, he was Hollywood's first great alcoholic. Long before rehab was an option, he drank himself into a joke. Studios covered for him at first, but by the end, even they couldn't save him. In the 1920s, Barrymore was on top of the world. He had the looks, the voice, and the talent. But off-camera, he was rarely sober. His drinking got so bad that directors had to feed him lines off-camera because he couldn't remember them. Some days, he couldn't even stand up straight and had to be held up by crew members just to finish a scene. Everyone in Hollywood knew he had a problem. He showed up drunk, stayed drunk, and somehow still got roles, at first. But things fell apart quickly. One night during a live performance, he completely blanked out. Instead of trying to recover, he turned to the audience and slurred, "Line, please?" The show was shut down early, and from then on, everyone knew Barrymore wasn't the same actor anymore. By the 1930s, his drinking wrecked his career. Studios didn't want to risk hiring him, and directors stopped covering for him. Even when friends tried to help, he kept drinking. His body started shutting down, shaking hands, failing memory, and a career in free fall. It wasn't just his career that crumbled. His personal life was a mess. He burned through marriages, lost his fortune, and ruined friendships. He was once considered one of the greatest actors of his time, but by the end he was a cautionary tale. The final years? A disaster. He was broke, sick, and barely able to work. Friends had to help pay his bills, but nothing could stop him from drinking himself to death. And if you think Hollywood let him rest in peace, think again. His so-called friends stole his corpse as a prank, dragging his lifeless body around for one last drunken joke. Barrymore was the blueprint for Hollywood self-destruction. He was the first major star to drink himself into oblivion, but he wouldn't be the last. W.C. Fields. While most stars tried to hide their drinking, Fields didn't even bother. He carried a thermos full of gin everywhere, labeled with innocent words like pineapple juice or orange soda. Everyone knew what was inside, but no one dared to stop him. By the time he made it big in Hollywood, Fields was already a heavy drinker. He had spent years in vaudeville, performing night after night while nursing a constant buzz. Drinking was part of his personality, both on and off screen. He played lovable drunks in films, but behind the scenes he was far from charming when the alcohol took over. His drinking got so bad that directors had to shoot around his hangovers. Mornings were a lost cause. He was either too sick or still drunk. By afternoon, He'd start sipping from his juice thermos just to get through filming. Some days he was so hammered that he slurred entire scenes, forcing multiple retakes. Other times he skipped set entirely, leaving studios scrambling to explain his absence. Fields had a sharp wit, but when he drank, his temper flared. He'd curse out producers, insult his co-stars, and storm off set if something didn't go his way. His drinking wore down his body over time. His once sharp comedic timing started slipping, and so did his health. By the 1940s, his body was failing him. His liver was shot, and doctors warned him that if he didn't quit drinking, he wouldn't last much longer. But Fields didn't care. Instead of quitting, he had a liquor stash built into his hospital room. Nurses would find hidden bottles of whiskey under his mattress, and he'd sneak drinks when no one was looking. He drank until his final breath. When Fields died in 1946, people weren't surprised. His liver had given up long before he did. His career was legendary, but so was his drinking. And unlike other stars, he never tried to pretend otherwise. W.C. Fields wasn't just drunk all the time, he made sure everyone knew it. Errol Flynn. He was the ultimate movie hero, dashing, fearless, and always up for an adventure. But off-screen, he was a reckless alcoholic who drank so much that even Hollywood couldn't keep up with him. If there was a bottle around, Flynn was already ahead of the game. Flynn's drinking wasn't just a bad habit, it was his lifestyle. He'd start his day with champagne, switch to hard liquor by lunch, and keep going until he passed out. Studios tried to hide it, but his drinking made productions a nightmare. He slurred his lines, stumbled through action scenes, and sometimes needed to be propped up just to finish filming. During The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938, he was so drunk during fight scenes that stunt doubles had to take over more than usual. In They Died with Their Boots On, 1941, he kept falling off his horse because he couldn't stay balanced. Directors grew frustrated, but Flynn's star power kept him employed, at least for a while. His drinking wasn't just for fun. Flynn was self-medicating, drowning out personal demons with endless bottles of rum and whiskey. He was constantly in legal trouble, facing accusations of assault and scandalous affairs. His court cases became just as famous as his movies, but instead of slowing down, he drank even harder. By the 1950s, Hollywood had enough. Studios stopped covering for him, and his reputation crashed. His once chiseled looks were puffed and bloated from years of heavy drinking. His liver was failing, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. In 1959, Flynn's body finally gave up. At just 50 years old, he died of a massive heart attack, but doctors found his organs were destroyed from years of alcohol abuse. His liver was so damaged that they said it looked like he belonged to an 80-year-old man. Flynn was Hollywood's original bad boy, but his addiction was his downfall. He lived fast, drank hard, and never made it to old age. If Hollywood was a party, Flynn drank until the lights went out. Richard Burton. He was a functioning alcoholic who drank his way through nearly every movie he made. Unlike others who tried to hide it, Burton showed up wasted on set and still delivered Oscar-worthy performances. But behind the scenes, his addiction controlled everything. Burton's drinking started early. By his 20s, he was already downing multiple bottles of liquor a day. Success only made it worse. He became one of Hollywood's highest-paid actors, but with that fame came an endless supply of booze. During Cleopatra, 1963, where he met Elizabeth Taylor, he was drunk in nearly every scene. The two fueled each other's addictions, turning their romance into a storm of booze, fights, and makeups. His drinking was legendary. He once chugged 3 bottles of vodka before noon, then went straight to filming like nothing happened. Some directors learned to work around it, shooting scenes early in the day before he got too drunk. Others just gave up, letting Burton slur his way through takes. By the 1970s, his addiction took its toll. His once powerful voice turned hoarse, his sharp looks faded, and his body started breaking down. He tried quitting. Doctors warned him he was drinking himself to death, but every attempt ended the same way: back at the bar. Burton died in 1984 at just 58 years old. His liver was completely shot, and his body was wrecked from decades of drinking. He left behind a legacy of brilliant performances, but also a reputation as one of Hollywood's most tragic drunks. Unlike others who drank themselves out of a career, Burton somehow kept going, but his addiction won in the end. Peter O'Toole. He was a Hollywood legend, but he was also rarely sober. He built a career on charm, wit, and raw talent, while drinking so much that he sometimes couldn't remember filming entire movies. O'Toole's drinking started early. By the time he became famous in Lawrence of Arabia, 1962, he was already drinking more than his body could handle. He was known to down multiple bottles of whiskey in a single night, then show up to set the next morning like nothing happened, until it started affecting his work. His reputation as a drunken genius followed him everywhere. He would slur through scenes, forget his lines, or suddenly fall asleep in the middle of filming. On Goodbye, Mr. Chips, 1969, production shut down multiple times because he was too wasted to work. In interviews, he later admitted, "I have no memory of making some films." His drinking wasn't just a problem for Hollywood. It nearly killed him. In the 1970s, doctors found that years of alcohol abuse had destroyed his stomach lining, leading to internal bleeding and emergency surgery. They told him if he didn't stop drinking, he wouldn't survive. O'Toole tried to quit, but never fully gave it up. He continued acting, but his wild behavior and heavy drinking kept him from reaching his full potential. Even later in life, when he claimed to be sober, people doubted it. His reputation was too legendary. He lived longer than most Hollywood drunks, making it to 81, but his body was wrecked from decades of drinking. When he died in 2013, fans remembered him as a brilliant actor, but also one of Hollywood's most infamous alcoholics. Peter O'Toole didn't just drink, he turned it into an art form. Oliver Reed. His reputation for out-drinking entire bars made him a legend, but it also destroyed his career and eventually his life. Reed's drinking was on another level. He didn't just sip whiskey between takes, he chugged entire bottles. He once challenged 5 Royal Navy sailors to a drinking contest and won, downing over 100 pints of beer in a single session. By the end, he had to be carried out unconscious. On set, he was a nightmare and a spectacle. Directors never knew if they were getting a world-class actor or a slurring disaster. During The Three Musketeers, 1973, he showed up so drunk that he could barely stand. He got through the scenes, but barely. By the 1980s, his drinking had wrecked his reputation. Studios didn't want the risk, and his career spiraled downward. But the real tragedy came during Gladiator, 2000. Reed had been given one last shot at a big role playing Proximo, but instead of staying focused, he went on one final drinking spree. While filming in Malta, he downed 8 pints of beer, 12 shots of rum, half a bottle of whiskey, and a few doubles of cognac, all in one sitting. That night, he collapsed and died of a massive heart attack. His death was so sudden that the film had to use CGI to finish his scenes. Reed had drunk himself to his own tragic ending. Oliver Reed's drinking wasn't just a problem, it was his identity. He outlived many of Hollywood's legendary drunks, but in the end, alcohol still won. Mickey Rourke. He had everything: looks, talent, and a rising career. But instead of building on it, he drank, fought, and burned every bridge in Hollywood. His downfall wasn't just alcohol, but it played a massive role in his destruction. In the 1980s, Rourke was unstoppable. Movies like 9.5 Weeks and Angel Heart made him one of Hollywood's most in-demand actors. But behind the scenes, he was drinking heavily, getting into bar fights, and making himself unhireable. Directors hated working with him because he was either too drunk to perform or too aggressive to control. His drinking wasn't just a problem on set, it ruined his personal life. He trashed relationships, got arrested multiple times, and became known as Hollywood's biggest liability. Instead of cleaning up, he walked away from acting and became a professional boxer, a move that only made things worse. Boxing destroyed his face, but he still drank through the pain. By the late 90s, he was broke, washed up, and completely forgotten by Hollywood. Even he admitted, "I was drinking myself to death." He lost roles, lost friends, and almost lost his life. But somehow, Rourke pulled off a comeback. He got sober, repaired some of the damage, and landed The Wrestler, 2008, a film that mirrored his own self-destructive past. It earned him an Oscar nomination, but even with success, he struggled to stay clean. Mickey Rourke should have been one of Hollywood's greatest legends. Instead, alcohol and bad choices turned him into a cautionary tale. Even today, he's a reminder of how fast Hollywood can chew you up if you let it. Dennis Hopper. He was Hollywood's ultimate wild card. For decades, he was either too drunk, too high, or too unhinged to function. Somehow, he still delivered legendary performances, even when he could barely stand upright. Hopper's drinking started early, but by the time he became famous in Easy Rider, 1969, it was out of control. He drank on set, between takes, and sometimes during filming. He was so wasted while directing the last movie, 1971, that the film became an incoherent disaster, and Hollywood blacklisted him for nearly a decade. During Apocalypse Now, 1979, Hopper was so drunk and coked out that he couldn't remember his lines. Director Francis Ford Coppola had to feed him one sentence at a time because giving him a full script was pointless. Somehow, his manic energy worked for the role, but off-screen, he was a walking train wreck. Hopper's reputation was legendary, but his career kept crashing and burning. He spent most of the 80s either too wasted to work or banned from Hollywood entirely. At his lowest, he lived in the desert, talking to himself and drinking until he hallucinated. He later admitted he was drinking 28 beers, a bottle of whiskey, and doing 3 grams of cocaine every day. Then, out of nowhere, he got sober. In 1986, he made an insane comeback with Blue Velvet, playing one of the most terrifying villains in film history. This time, the madness was acting, not alcohol. Dennis Hopper drank his way through decades of Hollywood, burning bridges and ruining opportunities. But unlike most stars on this list, he actually cleaned up and made it back. His career should have been over, but somehow he outlived his own chaos. Christopher Hitchens. He was Hollywood adjacent, a constant presence in interviews, debates, and film discussions, always with a drink in hand. Unlike most people on this list, he didn't try to hide it. In fact, he embraced his alcoholism and made it part of his public persona. Hitchens drank like it was his job. Mornings started with scotch or wine, and by afternoon he'd moved on to whiskey, vodka, or whatever was available. He once admitted that he was never fully sober past lunchtime. His friends, colleagues, and even his enemies knew that if you were meeting Hitchens, you were meeting Hitchens and his drink. Despite being constantly buzzed, he was brilliant. His ability to debate, write, and command attention never seemed to suffer, at least on the surface. He could drink glass after glass of whiskey, then go on live TV and verbally dismantle his opponents. His mind was razor sharp, even when his liver wasn't. But make no mistake, his drinking had consequences. Friends noticed his once strong voice becoming raspier, his famous wit sometimes losing its edge. He started to look tired, worn down. Years of chain smoking and drinking finally caught up to him. In 2010, he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, the kind that heavy drinking and smoking practically guarantee. Doctors told him to quit, but he didn't see the point. He once joked that if he had his life to live over again, he would drink more, not less. Even as his body failed him, Hitchens kept writing, debating, and of course, drinking. He saw no reason to stop. It was who he was. In 2011, At 62 years old, he passed away, leaving behind a legacy of brilliant writing, sharp debates, and a lifetime of liquor-fueled intellect. Unlike Hollywood stars who drank themselves into oblivion, Hitchens never spiraled out of control, but his addiction still killed him. He was proof that even the smartest minds aren't invincible when alcohol is in the mix. Nicolas Cage. Unlike the other names on this list, he is still standing, but his reputation as Hollywood's modern-day wildcard has been fueled by years of alcohol, erratic behavior, and bizarre public meltdowns. If old-school stars drank their way into oblivion, Nicolas Cage has drunk his way into internet legend. Cage wasn't always Hollywood's unhinged meme king. In the 90s and early 2000s, he was an A-list actor with an Oscar, blockbuster hits, and critical respect. But behind the scenes, his drinking was getting out of control. Directors noticed his slurred speech, co-stars saw his erratic moods, and soon his performances started getting weirder and more unpredictable. Then, the public meltdowns started. In 2011, Cage was arrested in New Orleans for public drunkenness and disturbing the peace, after getting into a shouting match with his wife. Reports claimed he was stumbling, screaming, and too wasted to control himself. A few years later, he was caught drunkenly singing Prince's Purple Rain at a karaoke bar, so hammered that he could barely stand. The drinking wasn't just a personal issue. It wrecked his finances, too. Cage went on a spending spree fueled by booze and bad decisions, blowing through $150 million on castles, private islands, a dinosaur skull, and a pet octopus. When the IRS came knocking, he had to take every role he could get, leading to the infamous era of low-budget, straight-to-DVD Cage movies. Despite the chaos, Cage never fully collapsed like the drunks of old Hollywood. Somehow, he kept delivering performances, sometimes brilliant, sometimes downright unhinged. His 2018 film Mandy reminded people why he was a star in the first place, and in 2021, Pig earned him some of the best reviews of his career. Unlike Barrymore, Flynn, or Reed, Cage hasn't drunk himself into an early grave. Yet. But his booze-fueled antics, erratic career, and bizarre public breakdowns make him the closest thing modern Hollywood has to an old-school drunken disaster. Whether he crashes completely or somehow reinvents himself again, one thing is certain: Nicolas Cage is never boring.